All right. Well, afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone has been enjoying this beautiful day out here in Vermilion. Nice blue sky situation going on, which has been a little sparing of late. Like to welcome you all to the second annual SSICC conference. Ideally, we have next year's conference. The country will be a little less sick, but we will still stand by that we are very sick in the 90 cents, which is not a point of reference for some folks here. I understand that. So don't have a lot of opening comments to make. Put together this conference with the idea that we'd be able to bring folks from all walks of education to a research conference where they're able to put together their research and have it looked on with the same amount of respect as everyone else's. It doesn't matter if you're a freshman, sophomore, graduate student, or faculty member, everyone is able to put forward their research, have it considered, and ideally for some, have that be a point of encouragement for being able to continue forward a little bit more within the avenues of research and everything. Or if this is your first and only, at least it's giving you this experience. So I have a few thank yous to make. I want to thank everyone who's involved with conference administration, the faculty within anthropology and sociology, as well as the student body, who also put forward a lot of work into making everything happen. This year, we've got a bunch of very, very interesting presentations that you can look forward to across the day today, as well as a fantastic social to wrap up, to kind of close out the day this evening. Around 5 p.m., we'll head over to the rooftop of Old Lumber Company and just socialize and enjoy the fact that we made it through 2020 and its twin, at least part of 2021. So I'm not going to bore anybody else with any additional commentary from me. Just want to thank everyone for coming out to participate. And we'll get things going in just a moment with our first sessions. We're just going to make sure everyone's able to get themselves set up. So just bear with us just a little bit.
All right. Well, let me introduce myself. Dr. Cheryl Hartman. I'm with the sociology department at USD, but I actually teach in Sioux Falls. And I recently had a chance to do this study. I'm still looking at the data a little in different ways, but I have one part of it done. So this is going to be adult third culture kids, and I'm looking at the effects on their adult lives of two things that happened to them as children: living globally, in other words, in another country, and attending boarding school. So let me just define what adult third culture kids are. And this is a term sometimes called TCKs. These are children who spend a significant part of their developmental years outside their parents' home country as their parents served abroad. So let me just give you a quick example. Let's say you're Americans and you decide to go overseas and work as missionaries, ambassadors, business people, non-governmental agency, those kinds of things, and you take your kids with you. And so in doing that, those kids actually grow up in a culture that is not their home culture, not in America, but in a different culture. But then at some point, their parents come home, as do they. So when they come back to American culture, they don't know this culture, even though they look like they should know this culture. So somebody termed that third culture kids. So they're not really, their main culture is not really the host country where they lived or the home country where they're supposed to be from, but they're kind of caught in between, this third culture kids. So as I said, they often feel caught between what's called the host country that hosted them and the passport country, they have a passport for that country. And now this particular study focused on a subset of third culture kids, which are missionary kids. So this just focuses on missionary kids. And sometimes I'll refer to as MKs, missionary kids. And this particular study, these were Americans. They served in, their parents served in African countries, two African countries, either Nigeria or Cameroon. And their parents were American, and they spent a substantial amount of time growing up in either Cameroon or Nigeria, or actually both. Now, the people that I'm studying are now in their 60s, and one person was in their 70s. So now they can look back through their whole life to say, how did that early experience affect me as I look back on my life? And so that's why these are I'm kind of excited to interview this, to look at these. So they can so that's, yeah. All right, next one. So my research question was, children who grew up globally away from their parents' home culture and attended boarding schools, what do adults now in their 60s and 70s have to say about the effects of these experiences on their lives as mature adults? And I have two things I'm looking at in this particular presentation: living globally and going to boarding school. So briefly, some of the literature, again, there's a lot more literature than this, but in the past, actually, when parents went over before they had boarding schools, sometimes the mother would stay home with her kids back in the home country and the dad would go. That's not good for families. Sometimes the mom would go and they'd leave their kids with relatives. That's not good for kids. So actually boarding schools was kind of a step towards kids were a little bit closer geographically. In the past, people thought that children adapted easily, adjusted to boarding school, no big deal, but we found some different things from the study. Today, very few people go to boarding school before the 6th grade because, quite frankly, you can do internet, learning. There's other options. Previous research seems to extensively talk at identity and place issues, difficulties of re-entering the home culture, re-entering America. But this study adds to that by just surveying older adults to kind of see about how they view the whole process. So I used survey and interview method. I used some open-ended questions. I used a lot of open-ended questions so people could just talk about their experience, but I also had closed-ended where there were choices. I used snowball sampling, and I had an 85% return rate, and I ended up with 17 participants. And this is a qualitative study, so it goes, so you're looking, well, I'll come to that. So I have 11 women, 6 men, and this little part is really important. I asked them, what grade did you go to boarding school? 11 of the subjects went to boarding school in 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade. And that seemed to be a marker of, that's honestly too young. That's really young. 2 were in 4th or 5th grade, 2 were in middle school, 2 were in high school when they first went to boarding school. The data analysis was inductive, and I looked for emerging themes, like were there common things that were coming out of this? And so the survey included several areas, but I'm just in this presentation looking at the effects on adult lives. So as people look at their experience, how did it affect their adult lives? And again, all of the subjects attended American boarding schools. And the reason for that was so that they could return to their passport country and fit right back in, because there are English boarding schools, there are all kinds of boarding schools. So these were with the American curriculum, that kind of thing. So I found 10 things. I'm not going to go through each of these, but I am going to in the next slides, actually. So current relationships with parents. So I asked them, what are your relationships like with your parents? Because parents send their kids off to boarding school, so what is their relationship like with their parents? And these are some of the things that I got. And I'm going to use some quotations sometimes because that illustrates some of the information. So they often said that living globally connected a connection with their parents because they had this very unique shared experience. They could talk about living in Africa and what that was like and when they were growing up. And they also very much admired the sacrifices their parents made to go overseas and work. Remember, these are missionaries, so they're really sacrificing quite a bit to go over and work as they had. But when I asked them about the effects of boarding school, they said it often created difficulties. As adults, they said they felt sense of rejection. Their parents sent them away. Some kids said that adults now said that they developed low self-esteem. They didn't think people would like them. They didn't think people would want to be friends with them. And that followed them into adulthood. Some had issues of anger. Why did my parents send me away to boarding school? What were they thinking? I was a little kid. Some felt distance from their parents. Even though they loved their parents, they felt some distance from their parents. So overall about boarding school, about 1/3 were positive actually about their parents, 1/3 were negative, and 1/3 said there wasn't any effect on that in my relationships today with my parents. So here's a female, she first attended boarding school in 1st grade. So she's one of the kids that went away pretty early. And she said this in her survey: I always idealized my parents. I know it makes sense that I hated them for leaving me at boarding school, but I didn't. I love them beyond measure. I look at them as wonderful, if not blinded and misguided people. So the next thing I asked about was, what about your relationships with your siblings? Because when kids go to boarding school, they are separated from their younger siblings that are still at home on the mission station. And even at boarding school, if your sibling's there, Sometimes you are grouped by age. So, fourth graders will room with fourth graders, and maybe you have a sixth grade sibling who's, so what are relationships like now in their 60s after all that? So attending boarding school often separates. So would they be close or distant? And here a strong pattern emerged. Relationships with siblings in the present were close. Everybody marked close or very close, except for one person. And she was actually close to two of her siblings, but one she was not. But otherwise, the siblings were very close. But what did emerge is that relationships were stronger if they attended boarding school together, which isn't surprising because, of course, you share an experience. But one person pointed out, but maybe that's an age difference. Maybe it's just that we were closer because we were the same age, not just because of boarding school. So kind of who knows. And the other thing that emerged is that often if there was an older sibling and a younger sibling, the older sibling seemed to take real responsibility for the younger sibling. They kind of sort of did a little parenting in a way. And then I also asked kind of a related question, how close were you to other boarding school children? And the reason for that is, again, with siblings, you're kind of separated from them, but you're close maybe to somebody else in age. Maybe you room with another little kid that's your age. So very, very strong pattern here. 82% say they were close or very close to other missionary kid boarders. 0 were distant. And they pointed out that they could easily pick up with missionary kid relationships in adulthood. And this person said, they became my family. I became part of theirs as we were all away from our biological families. We shared a unique bond that cannot ever be broken. And some of them could pick up relationships, honestly, decades later. Then I asked about religious or political inclinations. Religiosity is not surprising. About 82% said that religion or spirituality was important. Again, their parents are working in the field of Christianity. But also, 65% said that they felt like they were more appreciative of other religions because of living in a different country where there were a variety of religions. And that was interesting because that indicates maybe an openness to other religions besides your own. And then I asked about politics. I have to be honest, I did this survey before the 2020 election, and our country was quite divided, wasn't it? So apolitical, meaning no politics, no one was that. Half were liberal, a third were conservative, and then 12 were moderate. So I think that's kind of the in-between. So actually, I was kind of surprised. I thought maybe more would be conservative because it's a Christian, very Christian committed group. So I kind of asked some of my subjects, and a couple of examples, answers came back like, maybe living globally, you become much less materialistic. You don't really care about materialistic things so much. And maybe that's more liberal, let's social justice kinds of things, not so much I got to grow business. And then other person said maybe valuing people from other cultures, maybe that creates a liberal bent. So about half are liberal, but again, only a third were conservative. So it's kind of a little bit, I don't know. So then I asked, what are the benefits of living globally? And they said, we're open to diverse populations. That's kind of the overarching theme. But here were some, I asked them to check. This was like, you could check all the apply. And these were some of the things that came up. I'm comfortable with diverse populations. I understand the world better, I feel like, because of course they've lived other places. I'm connected to others who live globally. I can relate to displaced people. I have a heightened interest in other cultures. I'm less materialistic. I have diverse friends and acquaintances. However, one of the items was I make friends easily. That was marked by less than half, which is interesting because I think I'll get to this with this one. So the challenges of living globally. So this was the benefits of living globally, now the challenges, and then we're going to look at boarding school. So literature kind of indicates that third culture kids can experience a lot of grief and loss. Let me just explain quickly why that is. First of all, children leave parents very early to go to boarding school. That's a grief and a loss of parents. As you make friends at boarding school, you go to boarding school for about 4 months, and then you go home for a couple months to the mission station. Now you have to leave your boyfriend, your friends, your girlfriends, and your home, and then you go back. The other thing that happens is your friends go back to America, and so you lose them forever in a way, or you yourself come back to America, and so you lose. So there's a lot of grief and loss actually of parents, but also of friends. So some of the most frequently cited difficulties: losing friends, holding friends lightly because they fear of losing them. So they said, even in adulthood, I tend to let, if the friendship kind of drifts away, I really let it drift. I don't really hold tightly to my friends. Thinking that friends are replaceable. And then shyness around other Americans. So I thought, so actually sometimes children talked about how they didn't want to complain to their parents if they were lonely at boarding school because they were afraid they would interfere with their parents' work. And so here's a few quotes. And I think these are a little sad. I struggled with thinking my parents loved me, but believed that God's work was so important that I had to deal with this and be brave. And she was a second grader when she went to school first. The next one was a third grader, and she was a little girl when she first went to school. She said, my parents felt called to missionary work, and I felt I was part of that call. My sister told me in my first week at school that if something bad or sad happened to not write about it in my weekly letter to my parents until after it was over. She explained if I didn't do that, mom and dad would worry about me, and by the time they got my letter telling about whatever the issue was, it would already be over. It's kind of like, shut up and don't share it with your parents. And then this third grader, when I was in sixth grade, I consciously made the decision that I was not going to cry. I was going to be brave and suck it up. Okay. Okay. Now, boarding school. So when I looked at relationships and then I looked at life in general related to boarding school, the relationships, there were more negative than positive. Actually, that experience was affecting relationships negatively. But life in general, more positive. So let's look at the positives. People said, I'm adaptable, I'm self-reliant, I'm independent, I'm dependable, I'm close to other missionary kids, I'm able to disconnect from others easily, I have a passion for travel. And then the negatives were, I have a lack of trust that valued relationships would stick around, and that people always leaving. This other one said, I become clingy and needy. She was talking especially about relationships. It was a woman with men. She got too clingy and needy. Picking the wrong spouse because I lacked confidence. Abandonment and anger issues. And then in lingering anxiety that loss is about to occur, and even divorce. So then I asked about, did living globally, this is not boarding school, living globally affect your educational choices and your career choices? And about half were influenced in their educational choices by their parents' work. So I threw this one in because that person's a sociology major, but anyway, she said, I consider myself to be a global citizen. I can't begin to relate to how it would be to have lived in one place my entire life. I majored in sociology in college and then went on to receive a master's of divinity degree with an emphasis on mission and ecumenism. That word. And then career choices actually were more influenced. About 2/3 said they were influenced by living globally. One woman said that she learned the art of negotiating in the markets in Africa. Now she's a commercial real estate broker in Dallas, and that helped her with negotiating. And the other said that she began her career in social work, but she was way in over her head. In the last 32 years, she's been working in the travel industry. And she said, I love this last sentence. I felt that I had found my tribe. So the final question I asked was current happiness. How happy are you? You had this extraordinary childhood, you had adult life. And so they had 3 choices, and actually 100% marked happy or very happy, and most were very happy. So that was kind of good news. So in their adult lives, now in their 60s and 70s, former MKs have gone to boarding school, lived globally, were indicating they were happy in their lives, having had a really unique global childhood experience. Okay, now I'm not done yet though, so sorry about that. So how do I look at these? So this is a sociological perspective on these findings. And I have to take a while to figure this out actually. I use what's called a constructivist approach. And this is that social reality is socially constructed. And the goal of social sciences is to understand what meanings people give to reality, not to determine how reality works apart from how people construct reality. What I was puzzled about was that some of the kids that had a really bad time with boarding school, some people had a really good time. And maybe they even went to school at the same time. So why is there this difference? And that's why I'm using a constructive approach, because the it's how the person interprets the meanings of what happened. And I don't think I'll read all of these, but the second to last one, the meanings MKs, missionary kids, constructed their experience are based on their interactions with others, how they define their experiences. Some said, oh my gosh, going to boarding school is the best thing that happened to me. And others said, going to boarding school ruined me. That's extreme, but. And the meanings they assign to living this childhood. Over time, throughout adulthood, these meanings can be modified, redefined, and reconstructed through the life experience and interactions with others. So yeah, they had that experience in childhood, but of course they have had an adulthood life. So those thoughts about that experience might have changed and modified, redefined, and so on. So I did find some stark differences, sibling differences. So sometimes, here's an older sibling. She said, I cried myself to sleep every night when I started boarding school at 7. I stopped crying at age 10 when I took up the parenting role. I assumed that the role of parent, protector of my little sister and other children younger than myself who were in the same missionary denomination. So that was she was an older sibling. There was a younger sibling. Now here's another younger sibling. This is not her younger sibling, but this one says it was very difficult for me when I was in 3rd grade. My mom told me that they expected you to go away in 4th grade normally, but they had decided to send me in 3rd grade so my brother and I could go together. Her brother was 1 year older than she was, and to be a support to each other. It was helpful for me to have my brother there, but as a 3rd grader, I experienced a lot of homesickness. And then one younger sibling, I just have to remember, she said, Mom had a jersey dress that I took with me. My mom thought it was for dress up, but it was really so I could sleep in it. I think she was just trying to be close to her mom. So I think I'm about out of time. So but the purpose was to increase insight into the effects on adulthood of having lived globally and gone to boarding school. Some of the experience were positive, close friendships, sense of belonging, global travel. Others were negative, loss of family and friends. And this is kind of my concluding statement. Those with primarily positive experiences need to recognize that some of the missionary kids have negative experiences. But on the other hand, those with negative experiences need to recognize others had positive experiences. So we can't just say it's a positive or a negative experience. And I have a little bit more on that, but anyway, I better stop. So.
Look at things situated up here real quick.
Okay, my name is Maddie.
I'm Derek. I'm Ross.
And our presentation was about the divorce and the effect that it has both on children and their parents. So divorce is something that not only affects those who are getting the divorce, but also their children. It has affected over 1 million American children since 1970. It can be very emotionally draining for both the parents and the children, and can lead to many changes in both of their lives. Children are affected in many different ways, like parents' relationship with the children, the personalities of the children, and having to deal with parent alienation.
Okay, so divorce in general affects a wide variety of countries in the world. It's not legalized everywhere, but it is in a lot. But in particular, America. Now, if you look at the numbers, there's a study done within the past 10 years that it looked at divorce rates within the past half century, 30 years, and 40 to 50% of first marriages end in divorce. Now that's a massive number if you think about it. But it's no surprise that it impacts not only the family or the children, family or extended family, and even friends, but it actually does impact children rather more heavily if you think about it. But that is because of the support that they receive at the home. Parents that are going through a divorce are going through a lot of stress, anxiety, depression, and that kind of takes a toll on them mentally, physically, and makes them kind of emotionally unavailable to their children. And that, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid, I always had my mom there, and she was always there to kind of guide me through everything. And if I needed something, my mother was always there. Kids going through this don't necessarily have that. And it can be a very tough thing for them to go through. Mothers that are going through divorces tend to be less affectionate and don't communicate as well. Plus, they discipline their kids harsher. And again, that goes back to the type of toll that's going on with themselves and their family. And then if you look at fathers, fathers on the other hand are in the same type of, they do the same type of things as women. They're the mothers, but they're much more likely to completely abandon their family and to be completely unavailable to their children. And that's an incredibly unfortunate thing. But now when you think about divorce, I know I've been talking about all these negative things that can happen. It's not always that way. If you look at certain circumstances that cause a divorce, a lot of the times they're beneficial because, I mean, more often than not, the males of the family aren't necessarily the victim of domestic abuse. It does happen, but it's more often than not the mothers and the children. And that type of toxic environment a divorce will help in that instance and get them out of or in a safer environment, if you will. And with that, I'm gonna turn over to Happy.
So Western societies are seeing a rise in joint physical custody. And that can also bring a lot of problems like parental alienation. Parental alienation is defined by psychiatrist Robert Gardner as a childhood disorder that arises almost exclusively in the context of child custody disputes. Its primary manifestation is the child campaign of desecration against a good, loving parent, a campaign that has no justification. It results from the combination of a programming or brainwashing parents in indoctrinations and the child's own contributions to the vilification of the target parent. PAS can affect the relationship of the targeted parent and reduce the amount of time they get to spend with their child. Often the victimized parent is also undersupported legally and mentally and is generally unaware of the whole situation that's happening and what the other parent is saying about them and how they're targeting them. With that, I'll give it to
So to end off this discussion, I'm gonna kind of build off of Derek, and like he said, divorce does affect more than just the couple involved. So to kind of illustrate that and visualize it, I'll give some statistics about children who have gone through a divorce. So research has shown that children with parents that are divorced are more likely to have illness or injuries even than children who are still married. I know that seems kind of, how would that affect it, but it's more of an indirect. The illnesses and injuries are like a indirect thing that can happen. Maybe they're more reckless or whatnot. And then another study has shown that children with divorced parents are twice as likely to have a mental disorder or need other psychological help, which is a pretty substantial difference. Twice as likely is a big number, obviously. So with that, thank you for listening.
Would you like me to X out of this? No.
It's like a cone. It's the cone.
Yep.
All right. Good afternoon, guys. My name is Diana Humble. I am a graduate teaching assistant and graduate student first year in the communication studies here at USD. I recognize a couple of you. You guys are my students. Fundamentals of speech communication. I'm presenting some of my preliminary findings in a qualitative research study myself and two of my classmates have done. We're kind of on the conference circuit right now. We're presenting wherever we can. This is our second one. We're in search of funding. So if any of you have $500 to throw at us, that'd be really neat. My other two research mates apologize for not being able to be here. Yodit is currently doing her clinical hours up in Sioux Falls, and Chesney actually lives in Washington, D.C. She works on Capitol Hill. So we recorded this weekend for you guys. Hopefully it will play.
Study is titled Preliminary Findings in a Qualitative Study Exploring the Mental Health of USD Students During COVID-19. My name is Yodit Danu, and I'm a clinical psychology PhD student, and my interests include mental health disparities and public health.
My name is Diana Humble. I am a first-year communication studies student, and I'm interested in health communication.
And my name is Chesney Gurnis, and I am also a communication studies student, and my interests are race, intercultural relations, and mental health.
And so we are all students who were brought together by Dr. Leah Sayer's Qualitative Methods course. And so this project originally started out as a course project within that class and has quickly snowballed into something that we are all very passionate about and really excited to share with you all. And we would like to take this time to say thank you to Dr. Leah Sayer for all her support in our research endeavors. Okay, and so we wanted to start off with this quotation that one of our participants said, and they said, "I guess I just wish that more people took mental health as seriously as they take physical health." And we thought this really captured the essence of kind of what students are experiencing now with COVID-19, as well as just general experiences on the campus. Additionally, we thought this quotation really put into the need that our study is hopefully going to be able to provide. And so our research is exploring the impact that COVID-19 has on the mental health of students at this campus. And so what we do know with COVID-19 is that it is a physical illness, particularly a respiratory illness, and does have some physical consequences. We also know there's also a financial strain that's been brought upon having restrictions and not being able to work as well. And all of that does take a toll on everyone's mental health. And so some of the preliminary studies that have been coming out in the past years are majority quantitative studies and really looking at older adults, as well as individuals in China and other countries outside of the United States. And so we really wanted to do a qualitative study to really get at the essence of the experience that people are having with their mental health, particularly students on the University of South Dakota campus.
So the two questions that our group really was looking to answer for this study was, how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted your mental health? And how has your experience on campus been impacted by COVID-19? So when we structured our study, we really structured it around these two questions and hoping to get answers for these two questions from our interviewees. The approach we used was, as we already mentioned, a qualitative methods approach. Qualitative research can be used to help understand oneself, relationships, groups, cultures, and mediated contexts. So with kind of like Yodit said, we were really trying to gain a better understanding of each individual's personal experience on USD's campus regarding their mental health. So how we went about that was doing respondent interviews. We interviewed 2 men and 3 women at USD's campus, and they were all undergraduate students. They were involved in various activities, and they ranged in their school years as well, their age, their race. So we are really trying to get different samples of the population at USD to make sure different individuals were represented. 2 examples of the questions we asked include, can you think of a time during the pandemic when you noticed an impact on your mental health? And can you tell me about a time when a member of the USD community made you feel emotionally safe? In order to analyze our questions and analyze our interviews, we used a we use a thematic analysis. So in the thematic analysis, it kind of helps break things down by themes. The 4 major themes that we found included social isolation, the push for mental health resources on campus and availability, the stigma around seeking out help for mental health, and also the support systems one has when it comes to their mental health. For this, we used Braun and Clark's 2006 guidelines to analyze our interviews.
And so the first theme that we found was social isolation. And so this really came from various patterns in the data that we saw, including a change of structure. And so one student identified, you can tell like all the online classes is like really stressing some people out. And so really identifying that change in the routine and the change of the college experience even was another pattern that we found. And so someone else identified, I realized how much I missed out on this year, even though I'm still lucky that I'm able to be at college while a lot of other students aren't. I'm disappointed that I only have a couple years left and my first year was drastically different. And so there are various college experiences that students are missing out on. And we've had individuals also identify not really knowing the fight song until they were able to go to their first game in a year since the pandemic started, or individuals noting not being able to play the sports that they came here to play and how that really took a toll on their mental health. And just in general, individuals just feeling just different and not feeling like themselves and feeling really impacted by the result of this social isolation. So one individual identified, I like to be around people and doing things, and having to stop all that was really hard. And so while the CDC does identify social distancing as a precaution for COVID-19, what they really are talking about is the physical distancing, but it seems to get some people, it seems to still impact some people to have that social distance between their loved ones as well. And even making it to a point where they don't feel that sense of community or belonging on USD's campus.
The second theme that we analyzed was the push for more mental health resources on campus. So what we mean by mental health resources included more funding towards mental health resources and events on campus, increasing the amount of mental health counselors available for students, more mental health options available, such as telehealth or even another location on campus to see counselors, and also having more diverse staff available to USD student population. For example, one of our participants stated, I wish I had a counselor who looked like me. So just getting a more variety of people to meet all of the kids' needs at USD. So some of the quotes that were taken from our interviews include, I know it, in reference to telehealth, doesn't make their job any easier, but I commend them for putting in the extra effort to make it accessible. So we really wanted to highlight this quote because telehealth has opened an avenue to make it more accessible to USD students, which is a good thing that the pandemic has kind of allowed this shift for availability in reference to telehealth. Another individual stated, so many people are assigned to each counselor at a time slot a day, and that starts to get kind of, starts to become kind of a tight gap. So that kind of ties in that there isn't enough counselors as there is students at USD. Kind of that students are trying to fit into specific time slots at the counseling center. And the second quote also highlights on that topic. And it says, I was lucky enough that I got into the cookhouse in the first couple weeks. But by that time I had my first appointment, the entire thing was full. And with 10,000 students on campus, I mean, a good portion of them have to be struggling and have to be seeking help. So this really highlights that it took a couple weeks just to get a first mental health appointment at the cookhouse. And what that really is can be concerning, because we all know, or many of us are probably aware, that when we seek a mental health crisis, that a couple weeks later is too late.
Our third theme analyzed the stigma surrounding seeking help. So there's a worldwide stigma around mental health and reaching out and asking for help in relation to that. So it's no surprise that this trickled down into the USD campus. We found that a lot of this stigma is perpetuated within nuclear friend groups. So one respondent said, I was friends with different people than I am now. And I remember one time very nonchalantly saying, oh, I can't go to this activity with you guys. I have therapy. And they kind of looked at me a little bit and they were like, why are you talking about it? And they didn't say anything, but I could tell that they were judging me a little bit. So this shows that it is friends group and those that we consider closest to us that can be perpetuating that. This respondent also noted that the culture within South Dakota, which is vastly different from their home state, was something that caused that stigma to feel even greater when reaching out for help. The pandemic has also done just a little bit of good. I don't want to say the pandemic did good things for us, but it brought about a rise in telehealth, which is a great method for mitigating this stigma. So one respondent who had a prominent position on campus last year said that if it weren't for the transition to telehealth, like, I don't think I would have ever taken a step to talk to a professional for fear of being stigmatized for walking into the cookhouse and being seen reaching out and asking for help. That same respondent also noted that there's a bunch of the other men who aren't comfortable to do it, to normalize those conversations, and other people will bottle it up as well. So there is also a gender component to this, where men may be less willing to share than women. And part of that, going back to our prior theme about a push for resources, there's only one male counselor in the cookhouse. So having more male counselors in the cookhouse could make those men feel more comfortable and invited in to speak with a professional. And then our final theme came to support systems. So even though lots of people are reaching out for help on the USD campus, there are also a lot of different informal ways that people are reaching out for help or coping mechanisms. So some of these can be people reaching out to their friends, their parents, even their employers around campus, or them becoming the kind of makeshift counselor of their friend group. There are lots of different ways people are coping with the stress of the pandemic, and support systems are something that helps to mitigate that. One respondent said, for my safe space, I suppose it's a lot of my parents. I think that's a lot of kids. But I've also noted that a lot of kids, especially within this age demographic, tend to turn towards their friends. So friends, which are on campus, are easily accessible, and they may not necessarily be the most knowledgeable in terms of mental health. So it could be important to push more resources towards them to make them better listeners, as well as knowing when to refer people to professional help. Another respondent said that their favorite safe place on campus is with their boss, who makes them feel very safe and listened to. My boss is a really good listener. She doesn't always say a lot, but it's just like being able to listen and I think validate what's going on and help like reframe things. So knowing where those safe people are, as well as what makes them feel safe to them, is beneficial to us as researchers. And then finally, that same respondent can also take on the role as the support person, where they said, I'll try to give them like their time for a little bit. And then the next time we're having a conversation, be like, how are you doing? And, just trying to feel it out and go further. So it's important to note that all of our findings and our themes are preliminary. We've only done 5 respondent interviews, 5 pilot interviews so far. We hope to do more in the future, but our preliminary conclusions from those 5 interviews are twofold. The first, our preliminary results indicate that the COVID-19 pandemic has negatively impacted students' mental health on USD's campus, in addition to students' experience on campus since COVID-19. This draws directly back to our social isolation theme. So students are feeling more socially isolated as well as physically isolated. In our second conclusion, our study found that students have become more aware of their mental health and mental health resources available to them on campus since the COVID-19 pandemic. Whatever it may be, the push, the marketing, advertising, other resources, people are very aware of what's happening on campus, but they're not aware of all of the resources available. So just about everyone we talked to knew of the Cookhouse, but they weren't familiar with the clinical psychology students that have their own counseling center on the USD campus. So there is also an additional, we would push for more knowledge about the resources along with additional resources, which is why we as a research team created a graphic that shows a mental health resource list. We sent this to all of our respondents after their interviews, hopefully to give them a broader idea of all of the resources available to them, as well as some emergency resources if they're in real pressing emotional turmoil. And hopefully that's something they'll be able to share with their friends if they know someone that's struggling. We have our references listed on the left side of your screen here, and we would be happy to field any of your questions in person now or by email. Thank you for listening.
Try to put it right here. Yeah, instead of here, I don't. Maybe.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, I'm Seth Eaglin. I'm a medical biology major.
I am Connor McGill. I'm pre-nursing.
I'm Cassidy Johnson. I'm an atmospheric major.
Today we're gonna be looking a little bit like why sad people listen to sad music. And the first thing we need to look at when we're establishing is what makes music sad. So the first thing we're looking at is the modes of music, which is look at the different chording, so what notes harmonize with each other. And when we look at this, we can classify that into two main groups. We're gonna look at major and minor scales. Major scales are going to make music sound more upbeat, happier, and then minor scales are going to, in general, make things sound more negative, like sad music. Then we're going to look at the tempo, the speed, and what's important to know about music is the way that all these things interact with each other. So you can have a fast tempo music that's in a major scale that's going to sound very happy, or you can have a fast tempo music that's in a minor scale that might sound angry. And then when you compare that with a slow tempo music that's in a minor scale, you have a sad. Next thing we can look at is timbre, or the like the different instruments that it's played with. Some instruments may have more of a sad song. You hear the sad song on the world's smallest violin, might be different than what a trumpet does, but that's not to say that trumpet can't play a sad song. But it is to say that some instruments may be able to portray a sad sound differently than instruments. The next thing we're going to look at, especially with the genre of music we're going to be taking a look at today, is the lyrics. Sad lyrics, along with sad music, can bring the sadness of the song much further down than maybe just the same song with the sad lyrics. And what's important to know about music in general is that all these different factors play a role in making the music sad. So it's not just any one factor that we look at when we look at sad music. Music as a whole is a huge subject, and the amount of factors that go into it that make music that you can look at when looking at that is just vast. So the type of music we are looking at today is emo rap. And so we're going to be looking a little bit at the past of the emo rap. So emo rap has been inspired by rock beats, metal rap over the past 30 to 40 years from groups like Metallica, Linkin Park, and Eminem, who inspired artists of the 2000 era with their rock beats and rap. They inspired them. They started using more depressing lyrics rather than the pop beats that were pop lyrics that were being used in the day. And artists like Casper and Young Lean started to use these to bring emo rap from a subgroup into more of an actual recognized category of music. These people inspired even further people, and SoundCloud era where artists could get huge hits and lots of views off of stuff, just able to spread the emo rap culture even further from a subgroup into a mainstream. Artists did this for artists like Little Peep and Two Swirl, who used these depressing lyrics, rock beats, rap influences, and were able to take this genre of music from a subclass into a mainstream music class that is listened to around the world.
So I kind of looked at how sociology affects music and music as a whole. And so I start with music as a whole. I took sociology and I kind of looked at it from the functionalist point of view. And when I looked at this, I saw that music kind of served the purpose of making people happy and able to go throughout their days. And it pretty much gave them an ease to go through their day. So music really did serve the purpose of making people happy. Also, music has a vast culture. If you look at any culture, music is related to it. And they pretty much go with each other, culture and music. And that is pretty much to say that it is pretty much part of our social lives, music is. Now, time to talk more about kind of the emo goth rap part is the culture of it is quite different than most. Its norms and values are quite different. And according to one of my articles, emo and goth subculture originated as a reaction to an established punk scene, and they share some ideologies. These subcultures all have artistic elements, including music and dress, from the dye mohawk punks to the hip hop, stud belted and skinny jean emos. So what this means is the subculture was quite different than most. The way they dressed, the way they looked, and they were quite diverse. And it's also, as kind of Seth said, it's a subculture of pop music, rap music, and rock. And so this was kind of created the smaller group of those three. And this kind of could lead to labeling theory. And this led to kind of labeling theory because if someone was to go throughout the actions of being like these emo actions or doing some of these things, I start to listen to this music to have this sense of belonging. And this kind of is part of cognitive theory because this behavior of listening to this emo goth music is a source of therapy or of self-healing and kind of a way for people to relate that music to themselves and can lead to less anime in these people. And this less anime gives them a self of belonging and like a place to relate to people. And this culture gives them this group and this smaller group that makes them have this sense of belonging because this group is so different than other groups. To Cassidy on kind of our findings.
All right, so since we have the basics of what we need, let's answer the question, why do sad people listen to sad music? Well, there's a thing called paradox of musical, I can barely say the word, but essentially if you're listening to sad music, it's going to induce moods instead of emotions, and you are going to feel that sadness. Doesn't matter if you are sad within that moment, it will induce you to feel sad. So why do we still listen to it if music is sad? You know, you're sad, you don't want to feel extra sad. That's not the emotion people usually want to feel. You'd rather feel happy. Well, there's a lot of deliberacy to that, and there's a lot of self-awareness to it. People will do it to feel more powerful in that sense, and they want to feel that emotion powerfully. And there's also a lot of things. Sad music induces sadness in a current time. That feeling is unpleasant. A lot of people don't want to feel it. However, it regulates your mood, and it tends to be with sad music while you're sad. There's such emotions can be lasting as hours and days, whereas emotions are like that, and it's about one certain topic. So if you're listening to a song and it's about multiple things, you won't tend to feel an emotion about that. You will tend to feel a mood regarding to that song. There's feedback loops to it that keep you listening to it, keeps you enticed into the music, the artist, the genre, all types of aspects. When negative emotions are activated in an aesthetic content, a disassociative node is triggered, according to music perception in this section journal. So typically, if you keep listening and listening, your brain will disassociate from like all types of music, and your brain will think, this is what's making me feel better because I connect with it in some way. When your awareness is low, you can develop depression, anxiety, researchers say from the frontier in psychology. So the more you listen, there's more negative aspects. So what are the negative aspects and even some positives? There is a normalization, and there are some people that say that there is a overhype of like drugs, alcohol, sex, a lot of things with this kind of music. There's fetishizing of it as well. According to study breaks, these songs have encouraged mental health representation. That's a good thing. However,
They have also normalized feeling depressed, being unhappy, and expecting the worst out of every situation. A study conducted by Study Breaks also analyzed 500,000 songs released from 1985 to 2015 and found a very big spike, a very bad downward in happiness, and more people siding towards the sadder music and listening to that and focusing on that. There's also mood regulation to it, as mentioned, mood and emotion, those two versus each other. There's also a very big thing about nostalgia. So even if a song is very happy and upbeat, it could have connotations to it where maybe you're listening to a really cheerful song and then Lil Peep comes on with The Way I See Things and you're like, wow, now I'm sad. Or that cheerful song is like when you failed a test and now you're extra sad because you're like, every time you listen to that, you're like, I remember when I failed that test, now I'm sad. So it can trigger those kind of moods and it'll linger with you throughout the day, hours, days, as mentioned. There's also some pretty positive things, as mentioned. There's a culture behind it, which is very inclusive and includes a lot of people. So let's say you do feel these emotions such as depression, anxiety, any kind of disorder, you have a community and artists within that feels with you, and their lyrics can feel with you. They have interviews that you can watch of them going through what they have struggled with, and you won't feel so alone. Very therapeutic, and it helps people feel not alone, and it feels like they aren't going through these problems just facing it alone, and that other people face these problems and that they can totally get through it. So why do sad people listen to music when they are sad? It's essentially just a mood regulator and they listen to it to feel more of that in them. But there's no way to say this other than just be cautious with how you listen, and you will know how your body feels, how your mind feels when you do listen to that song or artist. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so we're gonna transition a little bit into our Q&A. Let me see if we have any questions in the chat. First question that we have is, did each of your disciplines frame your approach to this research project? Because you all come from different disciplines, I imagine, relatively different. So how, if at all, did your disciplines frame how you approached it? I guess that's a general question to everyone. So welcome to Thunderdome it out if you want to decide who comes up to answer first.
Hi, Amy. Thank you for your question. Thanks for coming to Zoom. Amy's my boss. So both of us, I think we were lucky in that Leah Sire paired us all together because each of us has a bend towards mental health, and each of us is really interested in the ways that mental health and the ways we communicate it intersect and how that kind of comes together on the USD campus. So Yodit, since she is studying all the theories behind mental health and mental illness, she was really able to bring a great perspective on psychological theories, but Chesney and I, Chesney having a lot more experience than I, were able to bring a more communications realm, looking at the different theories within communications that kind of shape that. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you as well for your question. So, you guys want to talk words or two? For me, for this, I actually do listen to the music, and I am within that community. So it's brought me a lot closer to learn about the community and the music itself, because I have to wonder myself why I listen to it when I might be sad and emotional at times. And I've realized why I do from the group, from artist interviews, from just getting to know people more, and even people who don't listen to the music as much as my group.
Well, for me, I went to a school that had a lot of drug issues, and I think a lot of that kind of relates to those songs. And for me, mostly, it was kind of like being able to understand what's going on. And I've known people who've gone through major drug issues, and like listening to that, sometimes listening to that music gives you kind of an understanding of what's going on in their lives. And I think that was the big thing for me. As I was going to say something else. Go
Oh,
for it.
yeah,
Maybe I can figure it out when I'm sitting here.
The topic, what topic? Yeah, I don't listen to that music basically whatsoever. I think the only times I've heard it is at like dances, maybe bus ride or a track team going to a track meet, maybe here or there once or twice. But apart from that, I don't really hear this type of music at all. So coming from my background, I think that this is basically a completely new topic. It was really interesting though to get to meet people, especially people who did, and get to learn how it speaks to them, as well as being able to contrast that on myself, like the music that I listen to and how it speaks to me. So
What I was gonna say, it's kind of as Diana said, is a lot of us like struggle with mental health, and it's a very popular thing, and it's become something that we kind of spoke out about, and this music has done a great job of kind of talking about it. And so it is kind of a huge topic is in our generation, because it's what our generation has been listening to kind of relate with each other. And I think that's been a great way to talk about health issues and like how people deal with things.
I have another little funny note. When our group first got together, we were talking about the topic because this is my research paper topic, and everyone in the group, Ben couldn't make it, but he's also in our group. He thought that was interesting. They thought it was interesting. And they were talking about it in the library, and they're like, yeah, I don't listen to the degenerate stuff. And I just thought that was hilarious. But that's in some way, it's true, but in a way it's not, because you just have to educate yourself more. And I think that's what made everyone kind of more like understand it, because they didn't understand it that much because it was so broadly just like, oh, emo culture, but there's so many subcultures by it too.
So for my group, the divorce group, I think what made us kind of different and look at it different angles was our personal experience with seeing divorce in our own extended families or families, because I personally have not experienced much. I had an uncle that did, but other than that, I don't know much about it. It didn't affect me as much as, say, someone who was the child of a divorce. So I think that gave different angles, because I'm sure all three of us had different experiences with divorce. So I think that probably changed a lot of how we each approached it and thought about it.
Yeah, no, you're good. Okay.
Well, I used a constructivist approach, and that is a sociological approach. So I guess that's kind of the background. I also talked about third culture kids. I was a third culture kid, so that's of course sparked my interest in that topic, and also gave me access to my subjects. So.
Other questions for our presenters?
I kind of follow up question what you said. So you said you grew up like doing boarding school, right?
Right.
So doing all this research, has it changed your perspective on boarding school? And like, if you could change going back and being your parent, would you change their choice? And you stuck with what you?
That's a really interesting question. For me, boarding school really positive. So I think that really good research project without having the heart. I'm a fourth grader when I went, and actually I was happy to be around other kids. But I do think parents, when personally send their kids when they were too young. So if I was a parent, when my kids turned that age, I was like, what? I don't say. I felt like all the parents are doing really meaningful work, and most of the parents are educators and medical people. And that's what globally, that was for everybody. So when you're doing this research project, I did see some of the negative contributions. I had heard that over the years, that's kind of why I want to do it. I think that's great. I heard other friends of mine say, even my own sister, it was devastating to me, So that's why I really wanted to see what I kind of came to this idea. That if your kid's old enough, it's a good experience to go to school. And it's definitely a good experience to go forward. But if you're too young, it's not a good experience.
So like the escalation of building the relationship and then raising and getting the experience of
When they're little, stay with mom and dad. In fact, today, actually, there's a lot of training that if you go overseas, you need to find ways to educate your children. Better that maybe they do a little bit academically, if they were their parents, it's way better. Once you get big, now the grades kind of sixth grade, once you're sixth grade, you can choose, And some kids choose to go away, even if they don't have to, they go on that, but they want social environment too. So I guess I didn't want to know what the grade was, but now I have a sense that I think it's fourth, maybe fifth grade for sure. That's an interesting question you're asking.
I just really don't know much about boarding school.
Yeah. I should kind of say, I ran into a guy yesterday who's a doctor here in Sioux Falls, and he said he went to boarding school from Sioux Falls to Chicago. He went to Chicago school, so he's international boarding school. In terms of he wanted to go to
Other questions?
Question for you as well. One of my former professors was or a missionary thing in Ethiopia during the apartheid era. And did you find that he had a lot of traumatic experiences with the insurgency and the rebels?
Yeah.
Like ripping them off school buses, different stuff. Did you find any other ways that can coach children's living on track and impact children?
So in the picture that I looked in. Okay, sorry. So Diana was asking if civil unrest was part of the, when I was living in Cameroon in Nigeria. Honestly, there was a very strong dictator in Cameroon, and so there was not a lot of unrest because it wasn't allowed. We did have to often show papers. We had, I mean, there was a lot of control in the country. This is quite extreme, but my father once was driving through a village and he got some men leaning up against a wall, their heads, and they were people that had been considered terrorists, heads had been cut off, put in public so everybody could see them. So we did experience some of those kinds of things, but it was a pretty peaceful country overall, but they kept the terrorists, what they call terrorists, and insurrection was kept down, We probably saw some stuff sometimes, but it seemed pretty peaceful as a kid, to me as a kid, it seemed very peaceful. In Nigeria at the time, big oil had not been discovered and it wasn't as unrestful as it is now. There were coups that happened, I guess, militarily, but we didn't always experience a lot of, I shouldn't say that. No, for the most part, it seemed pretty peaceful, but there had been, right before I started going to boarding school, there had been a war that had broken out, and but I was after that, I guess. So it was always kind of a danger, I guess, but I happened to be there when it was pretty peaceful. So.
And I think we actually have another question for Cheryl. This is from Mandy. She's asking, are there plans to extend the boarding school research to groups who attended schools based on the visiting country's culture, maybe as a comparison to the work that you've done so far?
Okay, let me see. Man, I'm trying to understand your question. Just a second here. So Mandy, if there's time, are there plans to extend the boarding school research to groups who attended schools based on the visiting country's culture? Maybe. So this would be people that live in that culture that attended boarding school. Is that what you're asking? I'm not sure if that's what you're asking.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure if there'd be time for the question, so that's why I typed it. But no, I was just wondering. It's like your interview sample was people who went to another country but attended kind of an American-based boarding school. Is that correct?
Oh, okay.
So I mean, like, if you were to go to another country and maybe attend a boarding school that was a little more culturally immersive,
I see.
Is that a thing that existed? Yeah.
Okay, I understand your question now. Thank you. I don't intend to do that personally because I don't really have access to the population that I'm aware of. So, I studied the population I had access to, but that is a really interesting, that would really be an interesting comparison. And I have in my, doing the literature review, have found that more and more, even the American schools are attended more by nationals nowadays, by people that just want an American education. I know that's a different question than what you're asking, but even those those American schools are probably becoming much more diverse, and yeah, so children that are attending school in the country at the school, I know there are people that are doing that. I just don't have direct access to that. I would have to ask, and I hadn't intended to study that. That's a really interesting idea though, actually. Very interesting idea.
Yeah. Well, if you can get access, I do think that'd be a fascinating comparison though, to your group. I mean, if you can get that, access to the data and the subjects is always the hard part, right?
That's right. But that is really an interesting idea. Yeah, really. So
yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
If you
Okay, so we've come to the end of this particular session. People can certainly talk during the break. We've come to the end of this particular session. So I want to thank all of the groups who came to present on their research. Really great stuff. I'm going to pause the recording. I'll pick up the recording again when we start our next session. But really great stuff all around.